Welcome to the CTCL Virtual College Days. Thank you for joining us. A few housekeeping announcements before we get started. You can use the Q&A button on your screen to type questions to our presenters at any time. Your camera and microphone are off, so the panelists cannot see or hear you. This is just one of many different sessions happening, so be sure to check out the sign up for additional sessions. The presentation is being recorded and will be available within about a week at the same website where you registered. And now I'd like to turn it over to our presenters from Denison University.
Great. Thank you so much, Anna. Thank you all so much for joining us today. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so we can begin the presentation. All right. So thank you all so much for joining us today. My name is Nick Radmer. I am one of the admission counselors here at Denison, and I am also an alum. I graduated in 2018 with degrees in theater and English, so fairly recently. I've been working for Denison. This is my second year, but I've been a part of the community for about 6 years now. And I am joined today by my colleague, Sarah Burns.
Hello, I hope everyone is doing well today. As Nick said, my name is Sarah Burns. I'm one of the admission counselors at Denison as well. I also am an alumna. I graduated in the class of 2012 with degrees in sociology and Spanish, and I am entering my third year working for Denison. But I definitely come from a Denison family. My sister also graduated from there as well. So happy to be here. I'll be working on the back end, answering some of your questions while Nick is doing the presentation. So I'm going to go ahead and see myself over there.
All right, sounds great. So if anybody does have questions as we're going through this, please don't hesitate to just pop a question in the Q&A. Like Sarah said, we'll be answering some as we go along, and then we will also be reserving some time at the end to answer some of those questions directly for the benefit of the whole group. So without further ado, we can go ahead and get started. I did just want to point out right before we get started, this presentation isn't really going to focus on like stats and figures too much. What this presentation really wants to do is focus on what really makes Denison unique. And for us, that really boils down to three things. That's relationships, opportunities, and outcomes. But first things first, I do have a few quick stats and figures for everybody to look at. You can see a little bit more information. We were founded in 1831. We have 2,300 students. We have a 9-to-1 faculty ratio, and we have 54 academic majors here, the newest one being a new global health program, which we promised we did not plan, but has turned out to be accidentally very relevant this year in particular. Just a couple quick things to emphasize before we get started. One is we are a 4-year residential community, meaning that students do live on campus all 4 years that they're a student. You are guaranteed housing all 4 of those years. And one other thing as well, we are a test optional institution. I know several colleges have kind of transitioned to being test optional just this year in light of COVID, and we are still test optional, but we have been test optional for many years now. So just so you're aware of that as you go through the application process. But the first thing that I want to talk about is just to give you a little bit more sense of the location and where we are. We are located in the village of Granville, which is about a half an hour to the east of Columbus, right in the middle of the state. And Granville is a fairly small community. There's only about 5,000 or so people who live there. But I think Granville is pretty surprising for families who aren't already familiar with it. It was founded in the early 1800s by settlers from New England, so it has a very New England-y sort of vibe to it. As you walk through the town. And in terms of having, things that college students need, I think it has just about everything. There's a bunch of different restaurants, there's a pharmacy, a grocery store, there's a frozen custard store, which is kind of a Denison mainstay called Wits. It's an Ohio favorite, but the original location is located in Granville, and I think we're pretty proud of that. But I think one of the best things about Granville is that students really do get to build relationships with the people down in the town itself, which I think is something that's fairly unique to smaller college towns. But I think Granville in particular is a really shining example of it. the story that I usually tell people is that when I was a sophomore on campus, I actually got stuck during Thanksgiving break. And there was a family that I used to dog sit for who actually found out that I was stuck and invited me home into their home for Thanksgiving dinner. So that's the kind of relationship you can expect to build when you are closely connected to a small town like Granville. But like I said as well, we are also about a half an hour down the road from the city of Columbus. And Columbus, again, similarly to Granville, I think is pretty surprising for people who aren't already familiar with it. Columbus is, I believe, the 14th largest city in the US, as well as the second fastest growing. And there's lots of great things to do in Columbus. There is a thriving art scene. There are a bunch of businesses that have their corporate headquarters in Columbus. There's a massive shopping center. Ohio State is obviously a big part of Columbus's culture as well. But I think it really just goes to show that in terms of location and size, you really do get sort of the best of both worlds when you come to Denison, where you have something much larger just down the road, where you can actually experience the life in a big city. But where you're actually living, where you're actually resting your head, is something a little bit quieter and calmer. And I don't have a slide for it, but I did also want to mention the towns of Newark and Heath. Those are two kind of more mid-sized towns that are about 10 to 15 minutes to the west of campus. So those have a few more restaurants. There's a Target and a Walmart. There's a movie theater, a bowling alley. So really, I think between all three of these different sizes, you really get a little bit of everything when it comes to size. You are allowed to have a car on campus all 4 years, so you can travel to these places by yourself, but we do also have shuttles that go out there every weekend if you need to actually get help getting a ride to any of these places. But without further ado, I really want to kind of dive into what we think makes Denison really unique. And the first big thing is relationships. If you ever listen to our president give a speech or talk to a group of students, the term relationship and a relational college is probably going to come up. And when we talk about relationships at Denison, we're talking about relationships with your class, with professors, with staff, with coaches, with the community of Granville itself. But what really sets Denison apart, I think, are the relationships that you form with your mentors on campus. And I said earlier that I didn't really want to bore you with stats, but I do have one that I wanted to share. And that is that Gallup a few years ago did this nationwide poll of college students in the US, and they found that the single greatest indicator for success among college students was whether or not they could say they'd found a mentor during their 4 years on campus. But at the same time, they also found that only 22% of college students could actually say that they'd found someone like that. And that kind of got us thinking at Denison, and we kind of did a survey of our own students, and here at Denison, we found that that number was 92% of students. So this mentor, it can be a professor, it can be someone on staff, it can be an upperclassman. It's really just someone who's going to sort of not necessarily hold your hand through the college process, but someone who's always going to have your back, and someone who's kind of going to show you how to most successfully transition from high school to college, and then not only transition, but also continually succeed. Oftentimes this can be a professor, and we do have a few, I guess, mechanisms in place to sort of kickstart these relationships. We have advisors that students are paired with. We have advising circles that students can join. Oftentimes your community advisor, who you may at other schools know as a resident advisor. It can be people like that. But I think a lot of the time, these relationships are most long-lasting when they form organically. And whether you take a class and just really hit it off with a professor, or get to know someone on a sports team or in another organization as you, and you just really hit it off. That's where these relationships really, really come from and really succeed. And, you know, speaking as an alum, one of my favorite things about Denison were these relationships that you formed. And frankly, now that I'm a graduated student living in the real world, I'm really grateful that a lot of these relationships persisted after I graduated as well. Just a couple weeks ago, I wound up on a 2.5 hour long Zoom call with one of my old professors professors who was doing alumni office hours. So again, that's the kind of relationship you can expect to build with mentors at Denison. And I think it's one of the things that really distinguishes us among some other liberal arts schools. But the next thing to talk about that really makes Denison unique are the opportunities that we present. And being a college, hopefully at the center of that is going to be the academic experience and the academic opportunities that we have. Now, Denison is a liberal arts college, meaning that we want you to succeed whatever it is, in whatever it is that you're majoring in, whether you're a psych major, a STEM major, in the arts, humanities, anything like that, we want you to succeed. But what we also want you to do is kind of take a view outside of your major itself and learn to appreciate how it connects to a bunch of other fields. So for example, if you are a student who hopes to become a doctor one day, yeah, you'll probably be taking a lot of courses in biology or chemistry or something, but we're also going to encourage you to take classes in the history of medicine in this country, or the sociology of medicine. If you're an artist, if you want to be a theater major, you'll be doing a lot of stuff with performances, and you'll be reading plays and acting and stage managing. But you're also going to be learning about the business side of things and learn how, you know, the theater industry and the art world functions as an industry. So hopefully with this approach to academics, you really not only get a well-rounded approach to your studies, but it's also going to make you a more capable person. It's going to make you a more empathetic person because you're going to have a better understanding of a lot of the different subject areas that your peers are studying. But it's also going to make you a lot more attractive to some employers on the other side of things as well. I forget the exact number off the top of my head, but I think that it was recently kind of announced that the average college graduate in today's market can be expected to go through like 5 or 6 different careers throughout the course of their life. So what Denison really wants to do, and what a liberal arts education really strives to do, is give you the skills to succeed in any one of those career paths, whether that's writing and communicating and thinking. That's the place where Denison's going to do that. So with the academic programs we have, I mentioned earlier, we have 54 of those. Those run the full range from your more traditional arts and science and humanities programs, but we also have a bunch of programs that are kind of specific to Denison and more unique. I mentioned the global health program, but we also have a data analytics major. There is a global commerce major for students who might be interested in business. We have a really exciting narrative journalism program that kind of combines different elements of a more traditional journalism program with something more rooted in creative writing. So what I think Denison really tries to do with its academic programs is give them more of a unique liberal arts spin that you're not going to find anywhere else. And I think that that is one of the key ingredients that makes us, helps us produce really successful graduates. But the academic experience isn't the only way that we hope that you take advantage of a lot of the great opportunities that Denison has to offer. A lot of it has to do with your extracurriculars as well. And Denison, I believe right now offers over 180 different extracurricular organizations, and they run the full range from arts and service and political activism and Greek life. But one of the ones I did kind of want to focus on briefly here was athletics. Athletics certainly are a major part of the campus life here at Denison. We are a Division III school. I believe we have 24 varsity sports teams. And in service of all of this is our athletic center. And this was a brand new building back when I started back in 2014. So it's still very, very new. It's a state-of-the-art facility. It really is. It has all the things that you could want out of an athletic facility, including several weight rooms, an Olympic-sized pool, a general fitness area, an indoor track, a multi-purpose room for Zumba and yoga and things like that. But one of the great things I think about the Mitchell Center is that you don't have to be an athlete to actually take advantage of any of these spaces. I think about a third of Denison students are themselves athletes, but and then I believe another third actually participate in club or intramural sports as well. But even if you don't want to get involved in that, if you just want to go down for a run or a bike ride or a swim, that space is going to be open and available to you. But the Mitchell Center is located up on the north side of campus, and now moving down to the south end, I did want to talk a little bit about our Performing Arts Center. And this is actually the newest building that we have on campus. It was named after Michael Eisner, who was one of our alums and whose name you might recognize as the former CEO of the Disney company. He actually came back to Denison just last year for the grand opening. It was really cool to see him. He's pictured right there in the middle. And this is a really exciting space on campus. It combines the departments of dance, music, and theater all under one roof. The facilities themselves are really spectacular. And I think for students especially who are interested in pursuing the arts but don't necessarily want a conservatory approach, Denison's a really exciting place to be right now. Speaking from my own experience, one of the things that was most important to me as a prospective student was that I find a place where I could pursue the arts, the performing arts specifically, without having to major in them in order to be a participant. And I think Denison, more than anywhere else that I looked while I was a prospective student, really felt like the place where I could do just that. I really got the sense that they not only encourage non-majors to participate, they also depend on non-majors to participate. So for me, that meant the arts, but for you, that could really mean anything. It could mean political activism. It could mean STEM fields. It could mean the arts. It could mean anything at all that you can think of. You don't have to be a major to actually participate in any of this. We do not want to put you in a box here at Denison and prevent you from exploring your interests. But the last thing that I kind of want to talk about that really does make Denison unique are the outcomes, the way that Denison prepares you to succeed in life after you graduate. And our main resource for that is called the Knowlton Center, and that is our career development office. And the Knowlton Center is staffed by a bunch of career counselors, basically whose job it is to have their ear to the ground about potential internship opportunities and graduate programs and indeed career opportunities that are waiting for you on the other side when you graduate. And to help you with this, they're going to help you develop your interview skills, help you build your resume, do all of those things to help you succeed professionally. Denison does have an endowed internship program that places students all over the country and all over the world. Students often get stipends to actually live in brand new cities, and they do that every year. But a couple of other great things about the Knowlton Center to mention. You can see that it says there, it provides a lifetime of professional advising. And in one sense, it's true that they do prepare you for a lifetime, but in yet another, they are also tangibly available to you for up to 5 years after you graduate. So if you graduate and you think you just need a little bit more help kind of getting things started and kickstarting your professional career, their services are going to be available to you. It's not like you graduate and then we kick you out and never see you again. But they are also available all 4 years of your undergrad too. You'll find that you're actually encouraged to start taking advantage of some of these services right from the very beginning of your freshman year, so that by the time you are a senior and you are about to step into the real world, as it were, you'll really feel prepared and confident that you can succeed. And then one last thing about the Knowlton Center that I always like to point out is that they do also offer some little seminars throughout the year in some of those, real world skills that you kind of wish you'd learned in high school. So things like how to buy a car without getting ripped off, or how insurance works, or what you actually use the different tax forms for. That's the kind of stuff that they will kind of help you learn and learn to navigate throughout your 4 years as well. And as a recent grad who is now encountering a lot of these things himself, I'm definitely really grateful to have had that resource available to me while I was a student. And then I do just have a few more stats to share here just to prove that these are getting results. The outcomes that we have with the Knowlton Center are actually resulting in students living successful and fulfilling lives after they graduate. So at the 6-month mark after Denison, 90% of our alums are employed in grad school or doing some kind of service opportunity. And when you zoom out to the 5-year mark, that number goes up to 99% of our alums. You can also see listed there some of the law and medical schools that our students have gone on to. And the one other thing I would say to that is that one of the other great benefits of a liberal arts school is that there is no one specific major that you need to pursue if you want to go into medical school or if you want to go into law school. One of my former roommates, in fact, he's at his second year at UCLA Law, and he was a religion major. So if you have an end destination in mind, you don't have to feel like there's a specific path that you have to take to get there. At a liberal arts school, at a place like Denison, these paths can be pretty flexible. All right, but just to wrap up, I wanted to briefly talk about the application process itself. So just so everybody understands, we at Denison adopt something that we like to call holistic review. And the way that I like to describe that is that there isn't one thing that's going to really make or break your application. So we're certainly going to look at the academic side of things. We will look at your transcript, and that's probably the most important, but we'll also look at your test scores if you choose to submit them. Being a test optional school, you do not have to, and it will not affect your admissibility or your aid or anything like that. But we also look at the personal side of things. We consider your involvement. We read your essay closely. We encourage you to sign up for an interview or visit campus so we can kind of get a sense of, how interested you really are in Denison, and we can kind of get a chance to learn more about you beyond what exists on the Common App. And I think all of these things kind of put together are hopefully going to give us a pretty complete picture of who you are as an applicant and whether you would succeed at Denison. Just a little bit more about, the deadlines and things like that. We do have two different deadlines. One of them is early decision, which is on November 15th. That is the binding option, and regular decision, which is a non-binding option where you do still have the option to pursue other opportunities. That deadline is January 15th, but you can still apply early decision by January 15th as well. And then one last thing to point out, Denison is an institution that meets 100% of families' demonstrated need. So what that means is that when you fill out the FAFSA and the CSS profile, which are these two financial aid documents that you would complete, we basically get a number that says how much you and your family can realistically contribute per year to Denison. And then if there is a gap between that number and the total cost of attendance, Denison will match 100% of that through our financial aid program. That is done through a combination of grants and scholarships and loans. You don't have to accept the full loan package if you don't want to, but if you were to accept the full financial aid package, there would be no gap between what the financial aid documents tell us you can afford and the total cost of attendance. I really do think that Denison prides itself on the economic diversity, the socioeconomic diversity of its student body. I know that I certainly am a testament to what is possible through financial aid at Denison, and my own experience would not have been possible were it not for the financial aid that I received. So that is pretty much the presentation. I do want to make sure that we have some time at the end to address some of the questions that may have been posed. But thank you all so much for your attention and for listening. And I'd love to just open it up now to any questions that may be floating around.
Pretty quiet on there, Nick. I don't think we have any questions currently.
All right.
Yeah, but we'll wait for a couple minutes and see if any pop up.
Sounds great.
Well, thank you so much. I'll just screen share. We can definitely, looks like you got a Q&A question right away, so you can go ahead and take over.
Nick, someone wants to know about the art program for students who don't want to actually major in art.
Absolutely. So one of the things that's important to keep in mind is that a lot of these classes in not just the art major, but in all of the majors, are available to students regardless of what their major actually is, especially those introductory level courses. So if you were interested in pursuing art, whether it meant studio art or music or dance or theater or anything like that, you would certainly be able to participate in the classes themselves. Another thing on top of that is that in terms of actually pursuing things like ensembles and performances and other things like that, again, you don't have to be a major to actually audition or participate in any of that. We don't want to block students off from actually participating in anything like that. And again, I do think for students who want to have art be a part of their life here at Denison, but aren't necessarily sure they want to major in it, Denison's a really exciting place to be right now. But one last thing I would say about arts for non-majors as well is that I know that some students feel like they don't want to major in art or they can't major in art because it isn't necessarily practical, or it's something that, you know, might not give them a job on the other side of things. I know that's something that I heard a lot back when I was a student, and I know it can still come up. But I definitely encourage you to keep an open mind about it. You don't actually have to declare a major until the end of your sophomore year. But if you do want to just give it a shot and see where it takes you, I think you'll find that the arts majors at Denison are really, really good at still preparing you for a lot of those practical skills that you'll need in the real world as well. And as a former art student, I think I can certainly attest to that.
Great, Nick. One of your Texas students is asking if you could describe the geographic diversity of Denison a little bit more.
Absolutely. So I am actually the admission counselor specifically for Texas. I do have the South, so I'm the primary point of contact for that. But that's a great question. And Denison is actually very geographically diverse. I think only about 20% of the student body itself is actually from the state of Ohio. And then beyond that, we have students coming from all over. I want to say, correct me if I'm wrong, Sarah, but I believe 14% of the current first year class is actually comprised of international students. We have students from the East Coast and Chicago. I think the South is definitely a quickly growing area, but it is a very geographically diverse campus, certainly.
Yeah, and actually, in terms of international students, we're supposed to have almost 21% of the student body be international this past year. And then as with so many things, COVID ruined that as well. And unfortunately, a lot of our international students weren't able to make it back. So we're hoping to see them again next year. But speaking of that, we also have a question about the language program at Denison. Someone's asking about foreign exchange and language and what the exchange program looks like. So maybe just touch on the language requirement really briefly, and then talk about study abroad.
Definitely. So Denison does have a foreign language requirement. The expectation is that you take up to the first 200 level course in a language, which typically translate to 3 semesters worth of a language. That said, you can test into an upper level, or you can test out of a language entirely if you did have experience either in high school or as a native speaker in a language other than English. Of course, if you do want to pursue a language beyond that 200 level, you are certainly encouraged to do that. I believe Denison offers 7 foreign languages right now that students can pursue, so a lot of variety there. And then in terms of study abroad, that's another great question. Denison, I think studying abroad is a really integral part of a lot of students' experience at Denison. We have programs in, I believe, over 60 different countries that students can pursue. It's really common to go, most common for students to go during their junior year, but it's also common for students to take a summer abroad as well. And I think our off-campus study office does a really great job of working with students right from the very beginning of your freshman year, so that by the time you're a junior, you know where you're going, what kind of program you want to pursue, and everything to do with that. And then one last thing too is that we also offer these classes called Denison seminars, which are basically traditional courses, but during either Thanksgiving break or spring break, depending on the semester that you take it, there's also a week-long trip with that class off campus. So I know ones have gone to Switzerland and New York and Hong Kong and I believe Tanzania and all different kinds of places. So I think when you factor in the students who do Denison seminars in addition to a summer or semester abroad, I think something like 80% of the student body is actually pursuing education abroad here at Denison. I spent a semester in England. It was a wonderful experience, and I definitely hope that no matter where you wind up, if studying abroad is something that you're interested in, I definitely hope that you pursue it.
Fantastic. So it looks like the last question for now is regarding the political climate on campus. I think especially pertinent after last night's debate.
Yeah, I'm still kind of emotionally recovering from that. I don't know about the rest of you, but yeah, I guess speaking as a student who, as someone who was a student on campus during the last presidential election during 2016, I definitely think that the political environment on campus is really engaged. I think that students are certainly very passionate one way or another. But I think one of the great things is that the impulse here on campus isn't to be confrontational with one another, but it's really to listen and actually have conversations across political difference. So it's really common for students to be members of both Denison Democrats and college Republicans because they want to be in the room for all of those conversations. And anecdotally, thinking back to the last election, I remember waking up the following morning, and I don't think I went to class that day, but I remember going to the flagpole that we have on campus because I knew that that was going to be my impulse as well as everybody else's impulse to gather there and actually talk to one another and be there for one another. And I think there were hundreds of people just kind of milling around, sort of processing and talking with one another. So it's definitely a very lively political campus, but I think it's a very healthy one as well.
We actually had another question just pop in. Nick, if you want to go ahead and talk about this, and then I'm happy to add as well the financial health of Denison. If you could just talk about like how things are going for us right now, if there are any cuts that we are looking at currently, and just kind of like the broad picture there.
Definitely. So I think Denison is honestly in a very strong financial position still, even post-COVID. I mean, I know no college is coming out unscathed because of the pandemic. I know there's certainly been some pretty significant expenses to making sure that campus is still a safe place for all of its students to be right now. But in terms of cuts, there really, to the best of my knowledge, there haven't really been any cuts to programs or staff and faculty or anything like that. I know some departments are being a bit more mindful about their spending and a little bit more deliberate, but to the best of my knowledge, we are not yet in any position where we've had to cut really anything on campus. I don't know if you have more to say about that, Sarah.
Yeah, I have been asked this question frequently over the course of the summer as families and students were kind of starting their college search in the midst of everything. And the one thing that there's two kind of things that I always discuss. And number one is our endowment is actually the third largest endowment of a school our size in the Midwest. So we have almost a $900 million endowment, which for a school like Denison is just phenomenal. I mean, it's insane. And we are just coming off of our most record-breaking fundraising year in history. So we did raise, I think it was just short of $260 million this past year, just through fundraising and alumni donations. So the financial health of Denison is really strong. And the other part of what I always talk about is the fact that our university president, who everyone is just in love with him, President Weinberg's fantastic. He has been extremely transparent with everyone about the state of the college and kind of laying out, you know, if this is the scenario that plays out in the fall, then this is what we're going to have to do. And if this is the scenario, and so on. So he kind of laid out for everyone, you know, what that would look like for us. And, you know, if you don't come back in the fall period, then this is the kind of cuts we're going to be looking at. If you come back part-time, if you come back full-time, these are what it's going to look like. And as of right now, like Nick said, things are still looking pretty good for us. I mean, obviously with this pandemic, it's pretty crazy, and you know, that could change tomorrow, but definitely, like Nick indicated, departments are being very conscientious of their spending, but we haven't had to make any significant cuts. And with the size of our endowment and kind of the overall financial health of the institution, the hope is that we won't have to.
And one last thing I would add to that as well is that this applies to the financial aid that we've been awarding as well. And I know a lot of families right now, given the past 6 months, are in very different financial situations that they may have been in last year. And I know that there's a lot of concern about how prepared colleges are to kind of address that. And again, I know things may change as we go forward, but as of right now, we are not in a position where we anticipate having to cut back on the financial aid that we're awarding our students.
Yeah, we actually increased it for this year. So
Yeah.
we definitely wanted to make sure we were taking care of our students and our families. So
Absolutely.
we had another question come in specifically about the scholarships and financial aid and how that was going to be affected. So you kind of were ahead of the game on that one,
Yeah.
Nick. But if you don't mind, there's another question that's asking about the deferrals from this year affecting next year admission rates. And I'm actually the gap year coordinator.
I was going to toss that to you, actually.
So I'm happy to talk about this. Typically, Denison sees about 15 or so gap years in a normal year, mostly for domestic students, but we'll have a couple of international students thrown in there. This year, we actually had over 50 students request a deferral just for first-year students. That doesn't include, you know, upperclassmen who may be taking a year off during the pandemic to stay closer to home. So just for our first year students, the incoming first year class, we had over 50, both international and domestic students who requested a deferral. So quite a higher number than we typically would have. We don't know for sure how that's going to affect next year's admission. The conversation I've been having with a lot of my students and families is that we have about a 40 to 45% early decision pool. So about 40 to 45% of our class fills up through early decision. And we have all of that information by the middle of February. We actually ask our deferral students to recommit to coming to Denison at the end of January. So by the middle of February, we will know if all 50 of those students who deferred, which I sincerely doubt all 50 of them will end up coming back, but hopefully they will. So if all 50 of them will be coming back, and then what our early decision pool will look like. So by mid-February, we'll have that information, and we release the rest of our admission decisions the first week of March. So we'll still have plenty of time to kind of figure out what that looks like. I would say there will definitely be a few seats that will be taken up by those deferrals coming back into this year's incoming class. So if I had to guess, it will affect this year's admission at least a little bit, but it could be, you know, upwards of about 50 students. So I think that is the last question that we have. We still have a few more minutes here until we're supposed to wrap it up. Someone wants to know about, well, they're very passionate about playing guitar, particularly jazz and blues, but they're also a soccer player. So if you have any comments on either of those, that would be helpful.
Definitely. So to start with music, I think one of the things we mentioned a couple times here is that we have a wealth of options for you to actually get involved, whether in classes or ensembles. We do also have a bluegrass ensemble as well. I think we're the only college in the country that has a bluegrass ensemble. So if you wanted to get involved with that, you certainly could. And again, you don't have to be a major to do any of that. I think there's 28 ensembles total on campus right now. And then with soccer, being a Division III school, we do have a varsity soccer team, but on top of that, we do also have club and intramural soccer that you can pursue as well. So being Division III, I think you'll find that there's a lot of flexibility with the level that you actually end up playing at, where if you start at the varsity level and then maybe decided you want to drop down to club, you can certainly do that, or try to push yourself to go up for a varsity at a later year, you can do that as well. But I think for a lot of our athletes, they find that, even if their sport is really important to them, they're still broadly involved in a bunch of things outside of campus too. And finally, one last thing I'd say about athletics at Denison is that I think we have a pretty great support system for students to actually, get the support that they need academically as well. We have the Academic Resource Center that can kind of help students liaise between their coaches and their professors to make sure that everybody's expectations are clear. So I think being a student athlete can definitely be a commitment, and there can be work that goes into it, but I think we do quite a bit of work to make sure that you are succeeding both athletically and academically here on campus.
Okay, so this might be the last question because we've got a few more minutes, but it's a big one.
Oh boy.
What words would you use to describe the student body? What is the culture like at Denison, and what do students do in their free time?
That is a big question. The words I would use to describe the student body, I think the one that I come back to over and over is compassionate. I think that students are really, really invested in looking out for one another and looking out for their community, whether that's the community in their residence hall, on campus, in Granville, in Columbus, in the country, frankly, or as global citizens. I think they deeply, deeply care about supporting and being there for one another. And that's the thing that really has stuck with me for these past 6 years. Beyond that, I think also multifaceted. I hope that that's kind of come across over the course of the past 40 minutes, but I think that Denison students are really broadly engaged and really curious in a whole lot of different things. And I think that that's one of Denison students' strengths. And then in terms of what the culture is like, academically, it's certainly very rigorous. I think we pride ourselves on taking our academics seriously, but I think we also pride ourselves, again, on being engaged beyond our academics as well, and taking a lot of those skills that we learn in academics and applying it to our extracurriculars and our social life. And I'm sorry, what was the last part of the question? What do
what do students do in their free time?
Yeah, so I think a lot of people's spare time is actually sort of tied up with their extracurriculars. So whether it's a cultural event or a performance or an athletic game, I think that is a big part of it. I think getting involved in the town of Granville and Columbus, I think that's really big. And I think just hanging out with friends. I think a lot of my fondest memories just are from when I would hang out in the common room areas with some of my roommates, and we just hang around and talk and watch TV and things like that. I think it's a really, I know in a lot of ways, I think college isn't all that different from high school in the sense that, you still have a social life, you still socialize with other people. And I think Denison really does excel at kind of fostering a community where you can do just that.
Great. Well, I don't think we have any more open questions, so we're just about right on time.
All right, awesome. Well, thank you all again so much for coming and listening and for your questions. It's been a pleasure to speak with all of you. And any last things from you, Anna, before we wrap up?
Yeah, thank you all for joining us. Thank you for making that Q&A session so interesting. When you close this window, there will be a link to a quick 4-question survey. We'd appreciate any feedback you can provide. Also, this was just one of many sessions being hosted, so be sure to check out the full schedule and sign up for additional sessions. In about a week, you'll be able to find this session's recording as well as all of the other sessions recordings online. Thank you all. Bye now.
Thank you all so much.